Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, the hero will be the little pawn. Let's see some examples how we can use our least valuable piece, supposedly, even to checkmate and to win the game. So what I'd like you to do in each example, in each position that we'll about to examine, try to figure out how that little pawn can become a hero. Here we go. This is our first example, and this is a pawn endgame with very few pieces left on the board. White, it's true, has an extra pawn. However, the black pawn, the only black pawn that's still on the board on b2, is about to get promoted to be a queen. At the same time, the white pawns are held off by the black king. Also, it's important to recognize that the white king is far too far away from catching that black pawn that's about to promote. So white's only hope is to try to promote his own pawn, or perhaps something different. And indeed, that something different is to checkmate the black king. So here black threatens to promote the pawn, but white ignores that, not like they can do anything about it anyway, and play king e6. It's a beautiful move that takes away any potential escape of the black king. True, allows the black pawn to promote to a queen or any other piece, but then white is ready to push the f-pawn and announce checkmate. These type of ideas in pawn endgames are very common. Try to make sure if you are facing such or similar pawn endgame, you remember this idea that even though your pawn seems to be held off by the opponent's king, you may be able to create a checkmate pattern. In this lesson, we'll be learning about various checkmate patterns that involves giving the checkmate actually with the pawn. Let's move on to our next example. Here we go. Now this is a lot more complex example, lot more pieces on the board, and for a change it is black's turn, not white. Well, if you look at the material balance, we'll see that white has an extra rook, while each side has a pair of minor pieces, white a bishop and knight versus black's two knights. And on the pawn count, black is ahead by 2. That leaves white being up 3 points. If it was white's turn right now, white could capture either of the two black knights to exchange and then capture the pawn on g3 and be in a winning position, being an extra rook ahead. However, in this example, as I mentioned, it is black's turn. So whenever you're trying to solve a puzzle or a challenge, a position, make sure you're very clear on whose turn it is. Now, in this position, if black doesn't make some very forceful and aggressive moves, then white will just simply win. In fact, in this position, black is able to force checkmate in just 2 moves. First, always try to look at the most forceful moves, such as giving checks. In this case, the black knight is able to move to h3, forcing the white king to its only legal square, which is to the corner. And now we can see how the two black knights beautifully collaborate and created a checkmate pattern by taking away the g1 square, the knight on h3, and the other knight on e1 is helping the little pawn from g3 to move to g2, making sure it's safe there, it cannot be captured, and white is in checkmate. Let's move on to our next example. where again the hero will be the little pawn. In this position, again there are plenty of pieces on the board, but if we look carefully, we recognize that black is a knight ahead. Generally speaking, when one side or another is a full knight ahead, it's a decisive advantage. It definitely is among masters or grandmasters. However, there are many situations when there are exceptions to that, and especially in case when the king gets in danger. It doesn't matter how much you're ahead in material, a knight up, a queen up, or a queen and two rooks up. If your king gets in trouble, you get checkmated, you still lose the game. Of course, that's not to say that material doesn't matter. It does matter because typically it's much easier to defend yourself when you have more pieces or more valuable pieces. Also, at the same time, it's more likely for you to create a decisive attack against your opponent if you have more pieces. However, the moral of the story is, even if you're ahead, you have to be careful and look out for your opponent's threats. That's one of the biggest mistakes that inexperienced players do, that they only focus on what they are trying to do and how to plan their own attack. And at the same time, they forget about the opponent's plans and threats. In this position, it is white's turn, and so being, white can checkmate in two moves. If white would just make regular moves, for example, trading pawns on d6 or bringing the rook from the corner to play, those would be very natural moves. However, they would be missing out on the winning opportunity. While I'm not saying that you should give a check when you see one, however, you should be aware of them because at many times it may result in forcing your opponent to an unfortunate situation like here. In this position, white has a simple and harmless looking check with the bishop on f7. The two bishops are cooperating beautifully on the two diagonals. The black king has no choice but moving to d7. And again, because of the wonderful collaboration of the two white bishops, white is ready to checkmate with the little pawn on e6. It's important to recognize that in this position, this works so well for white because the black knight is on c6. If that knight would still be back on its initial square in b8, the black king would have an escape square, but they don't in this case. Let's move on to the next example. Here we go. In this position, again, the material balance favors black. If you look carefully, you'll see that black has both his rooks still on the board, while white is only left with one. Each side has two minor pieces, a bishop and knight versus two bishops. On the pawn count, white has one more, 6 versus 5. So, normally speaking, black has a huge material advantage here. What we can also see is that the black king is very much surrounded by his own pieces. We can see that the white pawn could attack the black king. By playing f7, the king has no place to go. However, by doing that immediately, black would get the opportunity to capture the pawn and be just fine. Maintain the huge material advantage. However, white can make a move before, which we can call an intermediate move, and remove the guard of that key f7 square. Again, we would want to look at forceful moves, not moves that would offer your opponent to get away from there. You want to force the issue. For example, moving the bishop to f3 while it may look like it's inviting the black bishop to capture it, nobody forces that bishop to capture the white bishop, and black would simply, for example, instead capture the pawn and be in a winning position. On the other hand, after bishop takes on d5, that's a check to the black king, black has no choice but to recapture, and after the trade of these bishops, white is ready to advance to f7. Checkmate. Let's move on to a next example. Here we go. Again, in this position, there is a lot going on, a lot of pieces. Black has the opportunity to capture the white queen. Black has an opportunity to give a check. Also, we need to notice that the black knight in the middle of the board is hanging. What should black do? Black already gave up his own queen, which obviously is a big sacrifice. But black has in turn the white king wandering around in the middle of the board, surrounded by a lot of enemy pieces, and of course the opportunity to simply grab the queen. Right now, grabbing the queen with the bishop is certainly not a bad move, would leave black with a big advantage. However, to end the game and give checkmate is certainly always better than having some material advantage. One of those situations when you see a good move, stop for a moment and look around. See if you have a better one. So in this position, it's black's turn, and black can force a checkmate in two. And remember, you have a hint. The pawn is the hero. And here the correct move is to chase the white king further out to literally to the middle of the board. And now the black bishops and knight beautifully cooperate, take away all the squares the white king could potentially move to, and then when the king is being attacked again with a new piece with a pawn, it is checkmate. And now let's see the next example. Here we go. Again, a board full of pieces, and black is ahead. If you look, you'll see that both sides have a queen, two rooks, two bishops, but white has no knight, while black does. So black is ahead, and even the pawn count is even, 5 each. What should white do? White is on an attack. The rook on the f-file is beautiful. The two bishops are right around the black king. The queen is also there. Things look good. But how do we actually end this game real quick? White has the opportunity to checkmate here in just 2 moves. Well, if you thought of moving the rook up to f7, it's certainly not a bad move. It's checking the black king. And if the king would move out of the check, white's attack indeed would be deadly after queen g6 check, and then remember there is a discovery in the air anytime the rook from f7 moves away. Black would not survive this for many more moves. However, black on the other hand could capture the rook with the queen and get some pieces for the queen. Again, white's position would be extremely good, but it's still far away from checkmate. It's much better to immediately give a check with the bishop. And now the king has no moves because the bishop from c4 controls the f7 and g8 squares, while the queen controls the other 2 light squares where otherwise the king could go to. Black now has no other choice but to capture the bishop, and that would invite the white little pawn to f6 and a beautiful checkmate. Let's move on, and we're back to a little pawn endgame again. This is a very beautiful example that involves something called Zugzwang. Zugzwang is a German word for a situation where one side, because they have to move, they need to worsen their position. They get in trouble because they cannot say, I pass. It's your turn again. In chess, it's not only your right to make a move each time, but it's your obligation as well. Normally speaking, if you have an extra move, if it's your turn, it's a good thing. You certainly wouldn't want to skip your turn. However, there are rare situations, although I have to say in endgames it's not quite so rare, when you wish you could say, I pass. This is one of them. White's correct move right now is to retreat the king to c4. If now black wouldn't need to move, they would win. But they do. And the only legal move that black has is to advance the b pawn, and then white can just capture the pawn, and the result is checkmate again. Let's move on to the next example. This is a pretty amazing endgame where there are all 4 bishops on the board and white has an extra pawn. In fact, that extra pawn on d7 is about to become a queen. Looks like, if anything, black can only hope for a draw. However, reality is that black actually can win the game. Pretty amazing. The beautiful part in this endgame is that it's not a forceful move. Black cannot give a checkmate, but black needs to look for a checkmate pattern and to see how he can make that happen. In only 2 moves, black makes one quiet move, and then, regardless how white answers, the next move is checkmate. It's a pretty amazing pattern using the power of the 2 bishops, just as we've seen it a couple of examples ago. Suggest you try to figure out the solution. It will be very rewarding if you can try to figure it out on your own. And the answer is moving the bishop to f4. Very simple looking quiet move, but very painful from white's perspective. Amazingly, the white bishops cannot give any check, and neither can either of those bishops control the h2 square. And regardless what white's next move is, for example, pawn promoting to a queen, even though white is up a whole entire queen in the board, black just checkmates with the little pawn. An amazing endgame. Let's move on. Here we go. This is a very regular, normal-looking rook endgame that can happen anytime. Black is 1 pawn ahead, and normally in such a situation, the only question is whether is white able to survive or is black winning. However, here, because of the unfortunate positioning of the black king, white can force checkmate in 2 moves. This is not a very difficult one. White moves up the rook to f8, king moves to h7, and now voila, the 2 pawns collaborate and here comes the checkmate. Pretty elegant. Let's move on to the next example. Here we go. In this endgame, black is also clearly ahead. Moreover, the black bishop right now on b2 is attacking the rook as well as the knight. So white seems to be in serious trouble. However, white can create an amazing checkmate pattern again, a different one. At first you may think, how about moving the bishop to b7? Not just with the idea to attack the rook, but it is also a discovered check. And indeed, if the black king would need to move out of that check, then rook takes rook certainly would give white a winning position, especially in view that after king c7, knight b5 would be checkmate right away. However, have to be very careful when you're giving a discovered check, like here, rook attacking the king. You have to be careful, make sure Your opponent will not capture that very piece that gives the check. So bishop b7 would be a serious mistake. The correct move is to give the check with the knight. Now black has only one legal move, king b8, and now again the little pawn becomes the hero. c7, checkmate. Let's move on. Here we go. This is another very typical example when at the end of the day it will not be the pawn who gives the checkmate, but for the time being the pawn is the hero. Black is a queen up, white only has 2 pawns as compensation. But those 2 pawns are pretty far advanced and together with the white king are very well positioned, in fact, for one of the pawns to become a queen very quickly. White has no time to waste, needs to make forceful moves, that is, check, king h7, and pawn promoting to a queen, check again. King takes pawn, black had no choice, and now queen g6, checkmate. A very typical pattern that happens a lot in tournament play. Let's move on to the next example. Here we go. In this example, black has again the clear material advantage, having still his queen on the board, while white has a second rook, true, and one extra pawn, but nevertheless that leaves black with 3 extra points in advantage. The difficulty in black's position is that the black king is wandering around surrounded with a lot of white pieces. And white immediately can force the issue and force the black king even further out to the wild, where the white army can surround the black king and the little pawn again become the hero and give the final checkmate. Rook h1 check, king g4 and f3. And here we come with the final example of this lesson. Here again, black has a tremendous material advantage, having the extra queen, extra 2 pawns. All white has extra is a knight. How on earth can white win this game? Well, with this beautiful final example, let me illustrate to you. White is even willing to give up his only valuable piece, only other piece than a pawn, the knight. By giving a check on b6, on one hand, white clears the crucial c4 square for his pawn, and at the same time forces the black queen to move away from the control of that very square. Black is in check, the king cannot move, black has no choice but to capture the knight, and now, voila, checkmate with a little pawn. It doesn't matter that black has such a tremendous material advantage. If the king is lost, the game is lost. I hope after this lesson you'll value every little pawn a bit more than you did prior to listening to this lesson. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and so long until the next lesson. Bye-bye.